a new form available in our show notes. If you have future topics you'd like us to address in an episode, or questions or comments from any of our past episodes, fill out that form. We're getting a lot of inbounds coming in and want to just be a little bit more organized and making sure we are actually getting back to people and addressing comments and recommendations. So we published an episode a couple weeks ago. It's actually episode 4, where we talk about Dr. Eloise's newest iteration of her spider map. This is something she tries to, on a quarterly basis, go through and kind of clean up and make tweaks and changes and publish a new spider map. And there were some pretty big changes that she made to the spider map. And to no surprise, it generated quite a bit of buzz and interest and people sharing comments and asking questions. So I thought that it would make sense for us today to go through those questions, comments, and feedback, and we'll have Dr. Eloise kind of go through each of them and address and provide some additional feedback. We didn't physically type responses to all of them yet because we knew that we were going to be coming out with this episode, so figured that was a better way to address all of it at once. So, Dr. Eloise, I'm going to say that all of these were made publicly. So if you go look at our posts on LinkedIn, you can see these questions written out as well. I'm going to go ahead and say the first person's name so we can kind of address them, and then would like to get your take. So first one is from Amy. She says, the one point where I think I'm usually more skeptical than Dr. E is the speed or lack thereof of adoption of the market. Already hearing from CPOs who plan to wait until their suite provider builds in the AI they need rather than go with a BOB, so build your own. I get why, but it's suboptimal. I'm a bit of a pessimist on adoption after watching corporate behavior for a couple decades.
Yes. So this is so. I think there's a few things happening in this. It's a great comment, and there's an intersection of different things. Yes, corporate culture is slow. I've witnessed the same things. I am also skeptical of corporations' ability to do this. However, that said, first off, if you're waiting for the suite providers to add these features, I have beachfront property to sell you in Arizona, because it's you're going to be waiting forever, or waiting for Godot, for those of you that are fans of the theater. It's we are, and this will get to a topic that we're going to tackle in our next episode, but is who owns these suite providers? Most of them are owned by private equity or big organizations that aren't moving at the speed of innovation. So that's one thing. So waiting for the suite provider, good luck. Good luck. I just wish you well.
And I'll throw in there, just because they say it's in production or it's going to be ready doesn't mean it actually is.
And it doesn't mean it actually solves your problem. Like I think I made this comment recently, is like I have clients who have been waiting years for particular features that are pain points. They're just fixing existing problems. And if you're waiting years for patches to fix existing problems, what are the odds that you're going to get great technology, like advanced technology added into these tools? It's just not going to work. The other thing that I would add is that while there is corporate intransigence, we are going to hit a tipping point where all of a sudden, sort of like smartphones and what is becoming very clear in AI, is all of a sudden you hit this tipping point where it's ubiquitous, and then you have no choice. And so yes, we've shown a remarkable inability to adopt these innovations, but I also think at a certain point the underlying businesses will change and they'll demand it, because I think, and we mentioned this in a previous episode, at a certain point, you have to just question what's procurement's value. And if we can't do more with less faster, then at a certain point, we will get to the end of our efficacy and people will start to move beyond the function.
So I guess to kind of sum up what you said in Amy's comment, if you are working for a leader and their strategy is to wait for their current provider to build the AI they need, you might want to think about going and working for a different leader.
Exactly. I mean, that's a great point.
Okay. Michael had some very, very detailed, in-depth comments for us. So I'll do my. I'm going to go through his first one. I'll probably pause in the middle of it because it is so long and so detailed. And he does seem to be a pretty experienced research officer and somebody with a pretty extensive AI background. So love to hear people with that expertise chiming in. All right. Michael says, with respect to contract lifecycle management, for decades, a colleague of mine liked to say, give me a high school student and Microsoft Access, and I'll give you CLM.
That's awesome. I love that.
And he was right because that's all the management that was in most of these applications. Now, with respect to authoring, Gen AI can't touch a guided rules-based contract authoring tool where there are expert created and reviewed clauses for every category, product, and service with variation by geography and regulatory requirement, especially when these traditional applications won't include random text, include illegal clauses, or precedent, and these only work when all of the necessary clauses, rules, and requirements have been defined and enough auto-generated contracts vetted and verified, but 99% of organizations don't do the work. I'll pause there before I go to his next paragraph.
Yeah, so I have watched every contract authoring tool at the enterprise level fail because what he just described never happens. And if we if we could have done that, like that technology, that authoring technology has been around for a long time, but nobody uses the clauses. And by the way, I'm exaggerating here, but like you spend all this time on these clauses and then nothing follows, the like everything goes sideways, so you have by definition chaos. And so and everybody doing their own thing. So that's where I actually believe that Gen AI will harness the chaos. Now, I get that today it's not ready. It's, I mean, you can use it, but it's not ready for prime time. I think we can all agree. My point is that take a marker 2 years out. You can't tell me that Gen AI won't be able to do this better in 2 years with all the training and advancement that comes from day-to-day usage. And because you're never going to get the legal resources to focus on not only creating those clauses, but keeping them maintained, much less the change management to get people to use that. So I think you have to bypass the human problem, which is those three things, and just get to the machine generated, which again is coming but not ready for today.
So Michael continues, as a result, most legal contracts are cobbled together by paralegals who cut and paste clauses from existing templates. And the reality is that for this task, ChatGPT is more or less just as good as the cobbled together contracts that aren't nearly as good as they are purported to be. In fact, my number one red flag for a bad contract is we paid 10K for this, so it's good, when all that means is that the law firm suckered them for 10K.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, there you go. That's a great comment. I don't know what all, but I don't have anything to add to that.
So I'll throw in another kind of question here before I go on to Michael's next comment that we received from Erin around contract lifecycle management software. And she said some of the firms that she's worked for have massive amounts of contracts, so thousands and thousands of contracts, which becomes very unwieldy and unmanageable. And one of the benefits that she's seen from CLM tools is the trigger and the reminder around when certain contracts are coming up for renewal to flag the team internally. If we're eliminating CLM solutions from your spider map, how do you recommend companies manage alerts when we're talking about large volumes of contracts?
Why wouldn't I just have an AI assistant do that function for me? I can tell the AI assistant to read through all those 10,000 contracts, 100,000 contracts, and send me a notification 30 days or 60 or 90 days before the expiration. AI bot will just sit there and monitor that, and way cheaper to do that.
Yeah, that was going to be my thought as well, is program some internal AI to just say, okay, we I want to be pinged when every contract is 90 days out, 60, whatever it is. And you can, I mean, I feel like there's enough intelligence in A that you can even do some rules-based coding where it's type of contracts maybe need different alerts. So you can kind of do a little more detailed things with AI versus just everything having to be set up with the same automated reminders as well.
Right, exactly. Because you nailed it. Because the CLM is rules based, so you got to go and set up these
Yeah.
rules where the AI is a little more intelligent, and I can say, hey, can you? It becomes more intuitive for these contracts. Can you notify this, and can you do that? And it's going to be smart enough to be more precise than just setting up generic
Yeah,
rules.
and for example, since I come from marketing procurement, there's a lot of nuances and very complex things when you're dealing with
Yes.
media spend, agency spend. You can have AI build out certain alerts for specific types of spend, which I think would be very beneficial and probably do a better job than a CLM tool, which is more expensive.
Right. And with AI, what you could do is say, if we're talking about software licenses, you could have it go check usage
Mhm.
120 days, 90 days, and 60 days before the contract renewal and bring you that information before you even get to the alert. So I I yeah, I'm much more, I think the AI is much more sophisticated, and by the way, infinitely cheaper than a CLM.
Mhm. All right, more from Michael. I personally don't like the AI hub. Not all AI is created equal. Depending on what provider you are looking at, it goes from applied indirection, artificial IDOC, assistive intelligence, augmented intelligence, because the possible exception of extremely limited use cases, there are no providers in our space that will give you apprescient intelligence and autonomous intelligence, and definitely no artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think so. The AI Hub was more of a shortcut concept to, and again, it's just a high level concept. When I originally did it, it was almost lazy. Over time, what I'm indicating there is we need a next generation procurement platform. And I would argue folks in the center of my spider map are building that. Whether they're be successful or not remains to be seen. Whether it becomes intelligent or AI based or not remains to be seen. I'm very hopeful. I champion all these efforts. But what I'm getting at is that the new platform, the new procurement platform, has to be built around AI and this intelligence with the various intelligences that Michael was talking about there, so that the integrations don't become like this big impediment. The intelligence creation can be augmentative, doesn't have to be like completely autonomous and tell us what to do every step of the way, but that it is what we're getting at is a much more dynamic intelligence system where we're not predefining, we're not doing rules based, we're not doing workflow based, we're doing system interaction that is intelligent and that it's geared for an audience of one. And the way, Sarah, you log into a system and interact with it would be different than the way I would. And I want it, that system should be smart enough to know who we are and to react to us and take us on different journeys without having to pre-program it. So
And make
that's
and make recommendations.
right,
Right?
exactly.
I want you to tell me if there's somebody else that has a similar profile to me that's finding value. Make those recommendations to me so I also may want to consider or change my workflow.
And that's what I'm getting at. And yes, it is shorthand, and yes, like there's more to define there. We're at just the beginning phases of this, but it's really I'm pointing out, and I have a feeling there's another question about architecture coming, but is that we used the original platforms were source to pay. That proved to be wholly inadequate. So then we have the explosion of all what is the spider map and all the chaos of that. And now we're moving to a new generation platform, and so it's just a continuum, and this is great. This is really good. And that new platform, as I said, is still being defined.
All right, we've got a comment and some feedback around the naming. So this will be interesting. Don't you love it when people always tell you how to name your own products?
Yes.
Okay, so this is from Bill. Bill says it might be beneficial to consider renaming the graphic. Based on the podcast commentary, it seems more accurate to describe it as innovative solutions for the procurement ecosystem.
So, so, so Bill was actually listening, which is good. So thank you, Bill, for listening, because what he flagged is an incongruency or something that hasn't been updated over time, or hasn't been effectively updated. Because when I started, and back to this continuum point I was making, the spider chart was a reaction to the source to pay paradigm, and so originally it was setting up this architecture, a more extensible architecture with a new
In
platform.
2017, right, which was a whole nother
20,
world.
yeah, 2017, which was a long time ago. And so so the map has morphed into being showing more of the innovation in support of this new platform. I have a separate video that will by that you can see on my YouTube video that explains the procurement architecture, because actually the spider chart is just a subset of the procurement architecture, because there are some platform elements. There's the procurement platform, there's user archetypes, there's analytics and data. And so I recommend, and we can put the link in the show notes, but well, I recommend checking that out, because I actually, to Bill's point, that is the procurement architecture, and this has transformed to become much more of an innovation map.
All right. So his next question you kind of addressed in episode 4, but I think it would be good to kind of do it again here. He says, this leads to the question, how should enterprises utilize this map effectively?
Yeah, so the very simple answer, just a very discrete answer, is to look at the labels and to identify whether each label is relevant to their roadmap or not. Because what I've done is I've deconstructed the procurement value chain as to what all the capabilities could be, and that becomes the genesis of the roadmap. Not everybody needs 5 sourcing tools, but some companies do. And so you get to choose which 5 or 6 or 2 or 1 that you have. Please don't use one sourcing tool. So that's the way to look at it, is to really show the expanse of innovation and capabilities. So as a practitioner, that's what you need to look at. Also, just to look at the growth in particular areas, especially risk and ESG and category solutions. Seeing what's happening there and the specificity is really important, just to be aware. And this is particularly what I say to the CPOs and their direct reports. You have to know what's going on the map. You have to understand what these companies do, because otherwise you're not going to be able to effectively make good buying decisions. And we just talked about moving away or not waiting for source to pay providers to do this. Well, you have to understand the market. And the reason everybody jokes that it's headache inducing, and I joke about that too, is to really make that point in a very visceral way. This is the world that we are living in. You cannot just anchor back to one provider, because if you do that, you're going to woefully miss the target. And that is definitely not a digital way of operating.
So I host a supply chain nerd meetup group every 3 weeks called Shaken Not Stirred, and I hosted our meetup yesterday evening. And one of the members in the group brought up that they're working with smaller or mid-sized organizations doing a lot in the manufacturing space. And they see a lot of implementations not be successful or major adoption issues when organizations are buying technology because they're not looking at enough solutions before making their buying decision. And the
Mhm.
reason I'm saying this here and bringing this up is my first response to him was, you need to have this spider map handy.
Yeah.
And when you're working with the organizations, go through with them and help them identify innovation in the specific category or need that they have. And that will give them a starting point of what solutions to even look at versus just picking the first solution they come across or find.
Yeah, and that's why companies like ProcureTech and DPW Scout Labs, they are focused on identifying to give you to build those lists out, and so you have to just know to go look for those.
All right. So now to Bill's pet peeve. Love, love
I
us a
love
good
it.
pet peeve. A specific challenge I see in the market is the direct versus indirect distinction. The blending of these two domains can be problematic. Source to pay solutions and many in this map are primarily evolved for indirect procurement. For example, the data foundation box focuses on supplier records and onboarding. For a manufacturer, the supplier record is only part of the problem, and onboarding requires more than a check of compliance standards and approval workflows.
So, so it's funny. I agree with that. Well, I have a lot of comments on this, but but number one, on the data foundation, yes, it should be material, it should be product, it should be uh, a supplier, and I'm missing one, but anyway, forgive me. In my new book, I actually blow that out to encompass all of that, because it is true. Now, that said, Creatives, they were, I had some long debates with them because they made the same point, and that's one of the reasons they made it in, is because they do material master data there. So they would raise their hand and say, yeah, we do this, and that's one of the reasons they made it into the center. So I agree, it should be broader than just suppliers. And uh, as sad as it is, some of the providers in the data foundation are going to start to change, because the complexity, as you point out, between directs, indirects, and others, we need to get more sophisticated in that spot. So I just to tease, the next version of this map will be ever more controversial. some long-term folks start to fade away. Oh, go ahead.
Is there any thought for you long term about breaking it up into two sections or having almost separate graphics where there's an indirect versus a direct, or do you think they really still need to be more tied together?
Well, I take the point. I take Bill's point, and I agree and I disagree. Like operationally, they are different, and so I get that. And he's right. There's a lot of indirect folks on there, but there are a fair amount of direct providers on there as well.
I noticed, for instance, Lightsource, who I met
Like
the
source.
CEO through you and spent some time with him, as they're a direct sourcing platform, and I saw that was kind of a new addition for you
Yep.
on the direct side. So as an example.
Yeah. I also, go to great lengths I have a new architecture and on in my new book that's broadly supply chain specific and disrupts the ERP. So I actually would gravitate more towards that than trying to necessarily fix it on the spider map or not fix. I mean, I don't think it's a problem necessarily. But what I do think, I guess my sort of reaction um, is that we are uh, it becomes oftentimes this excuse that, oh well, we're direct or we're indirect, and one's too simple, one's too complicated, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. For me, I would argue it doesn't matter. It's still data. It's got to data that's got to be managed. We manage data differently on the direct side, and we manage it differently on the indirect side. And so I, I still come back to it's still data at the end of the day. And so whether it's a solution that focuses on one or the other, that's why I still am holding on to keeping them in the same place, even though yes, I admit many of them are indirect solutions. But I don't want to let the direct folks off the hook, and vice versa.
Okay. So there was a comment made in some of our content, and you alluded to this in episode 4, that risk management solutions are under your scrutiny this quarter, and that there's something that you've been looking at for a while, and they potentially may be eliminated from a future iteration. So we had a few questions and comments and people wanting you to expand a little bit on that. So I don't know if you want to just, I feel like this could be a whole episode in itself talking about risk management solutions, but maybe you can just give kind of a high level around your thought process around risk management solutions, maybe becoming redundant or not really relevant with Gen AI.
Yeah. And I have a whole chapter in my book about risk management. And one of the sub chapters or subheadings is why risk management tools don't excite me. And uh, my fundamental problem is that risk management tools often are get conflated with risk management initiatives and the risk management concept. Tools are okay. I have no issue with the tools as themselves, but they are not a proxy for risk management. And they are just a one of many tools in that whole realm. And too often we just focus on buying a tool and calling it a day. And this is that's not good enough. And that's nothing short of risk theater, as I like to joke. And so I think that's number one. Number two, the risk tools are not terribly profitable. So this is also a reflection that they're able to sell but not expand. And
Well, I'll pause you there. So what you mean by that is there's not an upsell opportunity. So I bring in a net new customer and then it's hard to expand once I've already landed and executed a contract.
correct. And when when we have our episode on private equity, it's no shock that many of the risk providers are private equity owned now. And also if you look at who their who their clients are. Oftentimes, it's governments that are willing to write the big check because they need the compliance, they need to check a box. So that's good, and that, like, there's nothing wrong with that. But don't confuse that with actually securing your supply chain, because securing your supply chain is a vastly different concept. And it's, by the way, it's more than just a tool, but it's also more than just an op model, which is what the consulting firms will try to sell you. This is really about a way of working and a real focus on where risk comes. And I use this analogy is there's when we think about airport security is not secure. It is try to get onto a US military base versus trying to get to through the security at an airport. The two are vastly different. Why is that? And it's because the military base is secure because they have a vested interest in keeping unauthorized people out. The airport, they don't have a vested interest in keeping bad actors out. They try to, and they use tools and whatnot, but a lot of this quote unquote security is performative, and it's not really actually securing the airport and the flights. And so, and there's, I've read books upon books and articles upon articles about this that is pretty embarrassing. And so the reason I say that is because many of our risk management initiatives are nothing more than performative. And because the focus is oftentimes at the onboarding and doing checks when we onboard the supplier, and very little operationally, or even more importantly, when we offboard or should be offboarding the supplier. And that's a big problem.
So to kind of summarize what I think I heard you say is a lot of them are helping organizations check the box, but not really get to the root of the real problem around what's causing the risk in their supply chains.
Yes, exactly.
Um, do you think that these providers, when I say these providers, I mean the risk management providers, do you think they'll get integrated with other platforms, or do you think they'll simply go away?
I think there'll be more and more consolidation. We've seen some consolidation already, and we'll continue to see it. And eventually you'll have a risk platform that you'll pay for. And like the tools are not bad. There's empirically nothing wrong with them. But when I think about risk management, the immaturity on that front is scary. Actually, I go to bed with anxiety. And risk managers, I like to joke, but it's true. Risk managers, if they're really doing their job, they should go to bed with anxiety every night, because the level of risk in our supply chains is unacceptably high. And I mean, even I go to bed with anxiety thinking about a lot of these problems. So we have a lot of work to do that has nothing to do with the tools.
Well, and in your book that came out in January, one of the things you talk about in the risk section is the greatest risk to your supply chains may actually be your employees and the people working at your company versus some of the other things that are often talked about and discussed. So I thought that was an interesting perspective.
Yeah, and a lot of times these things don't have to be malicious. We often, Hollywood paints this picture of hackers doing malicious things, and or terrorists, and those are all real threats, but sometimes it's just genuine oversight or lack of oversight or mistakes, and sometimes those can be the biggest disruptions. Amazon Web Services had a major outage years ago. I can't remember what year it was, but somebody hit the wrong character on a really critical system, or like typing in the wrong character, and it blew up the system for like 4 hours. So, like, sometimes it's not even malicious.
All right, so I'm just scrolling through our comments and notes. So I think we've gotten through most of the first round from episode 4. For those that have not yet checked out that episode and you do have comments or questions, we may do another round of questions, because I know the spider map has been a hot topic. We have that form in our show notes if you have anything you'd like to submit for us to talk about or any questions you'd like us to ask. We'd also ask that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are trying to get to our 100 subscriber mark within our first 6 weeks. We're almost there, so would appreciate that subscribe or that follow. And that's it for today. Tune in next Wednesday for another episode.